Hello and welcome to a new video on IGCSE Physics Classified Paper 2. In this video, we shall be discussing atomic structure. So to begin with, we will begin with general questions. Which statement is correct for the nucleus of any atom? The nucleus contains electrons, neutrons, and protons. Of course, this is not correct because the nucleus does not contain electrons. So within the nucleus, you have protons and you have neutrons, which are neutral charges or neutral bodies, uncharged bodies. So the electrons are outside of the nucleus orbiting around it. So this is incorrect. The nucleus contains the same number of protons as neutrons. This is incorrect as well. If the atom is neutral, the protons will equal the electrons. So in the diagram above, I have 5 electrons, so I would have 5 protons as well. But neutrons do not have to be of the same number as protons and electrons. The nucleus has a total charge of 0. This is also incorrect because it has protons and neutrons. Neutrons are neutral and protons are positively charged. So the nucleus will always be positively charged. However, a neutral atom would have a total charge of 0. So beware of the difference between the nucleus and the atom. So if an atom is neutral, if an atom is neutral, it has a total charge of 0. So the nucleus is very small compared with the size of an atom. This is actually correct. It's like a soccer ball in a football field. This is the relative size. If you have a football field and you have just like one ball in the field, this is the nucleus and this is the atom. So D is the correct choice here. A neutral atom consists of electrons orbiting a nucleus. The nucleus contains protons and neutrons. Which statement about the atom must be correct? The number of electrons equals the number of neutrons. We said that this is not correct. The number of electrons is equal to the number of protons. This is correct because we are talking here about a neutral atom. So B would be the correct choice here. A proton and a neutron are each close to a positive nucleus. How does the charge on the nucleus affect the proton and the neutron, if at all? So we said that the proton is positively charged. So positive with positive, we're expecting the proton to move away from the nucleus. So it will be repelled. So we're looking for an answer where the proton is repelled. So these are incorrect. What about the neutron? So the neutron here is neutral, so it will not be affected. It will neither be attracted nor repelled. So the neutron is not affected. This is the correct answer. And B is the correct choice here. So which row gives the relative charge of an electron, a neutron, and a proton? An electron is negative, a neutron is 0, and a proton is positive. So B would be the correct choice for this question. The diagram represents the nucleus of an atom. The charged particles are shown. Which row gives the proton number and the nucleon number? So the proton number is basically the number of protons. How many protons do we have? We have 1, 2, and 3. So we have 3 protons. So we'll eliminate C and D. What about the nucleon number? So beware, because you might have misread this as neutron. Right? So neutrons are the neutral bodies inside the nucleus. And how many neutrons do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have 4 neutrons. But this is not the correct answer because they're not asking about neutrons. They're asking about nucleons. So nucleons are the summation of protons and neutrons. Nucleons are basically the bodies inside the nucleus. So how many protons do we have? We have 3 protons and we have 4 neutrons. So the correct answer here would be the 7, not the 4. The total number of nucleons is 7. Basically, the total number of balls in the diagram. And we have 7 balls, so B is the correct choice. Beware of the difference between neutrons and nucleons because they're not the same thing. Which description of a neutral atom of copper is correct? A nucleus surrounded by electrons. This sounds correct. Nucleus surrounded by molecules, electrons surrounded by a nucleus. No, these are all wrong. So A here is the correct choice, a nucleus and orbiting electrons around it. So A would be the correct choice here. Which row states the charge on an electron and states whether electrons are located inside the nucleus of an atom? So they're definitely not located inside, because we said we have a nucleus and we have electrons outside it orbiting around it. And of course, the charge is negative, not positive. So so A would be the correct choice here. The charge is negative and they are not located inside the nucleus. So A would be the correct choice for this question. In the atomic model, an atom consists of a central mass orbited by much smaller particles. What is the name of the central mass and of the orbiting particles? Of course, we said that the central mass is the nucleus, right? So not neutrons, the nucleus. And the orbiting particles are, of course, the electrons. So D would be the correct choice, a nucleus and orbiting electrons. Which diagram represents the structure of a neutral atom? So in order to be neutral, you have to have the same amount of protons and electrons, the same number of protons and electrons. That's the simple logic of it. So for example, A would not work because you have one positive and two negatives. B seems okay because you have two positives and two negatives. C has two positives, one negative, so this doesn't work. Three positives and two negatives would not work either. So in order to be neutral, it has to have the same number of protons and electrons. So B is the correct choice. Next, we move on to something called nuclide notation, which we shall discuss briefly. So if you have an atom, X, it has a proton number and a nucleon number or a mass number. These are just arbitrary letters that I just created. They don't have to be P and M. So this is the number of protons inside the nucleus and should be the same as electrons if the atom is neutral. And this is the number of nucleons, which is basically protons plus neutrons as well. Positively charged and uncharged particles inside the nucleus. So this is the mass number. It's the number of the nucleons inside the nucleus. This is the basic concept which we will use to solve the following questions. So C614 is a nuclide of carbon. What is the composition of one nucleus of this nuclide? So like we said, this is the proton number. So we have 6 protons. And the number of nucleons, the total number inside the nucleus is 14. So we have 6 protons and 8 neutrons. How did I get the 8? Basically, I did 14 minus 6 to get the remaining number. So how many neutrons do we have? We have 8 neutrons. Beware again of the difference between neutrons and nucleons. They are two different things. Nucleons are basically all of these. Neutrons plus protons. So C is the correct choice here. How many neutrons are in the nucleus of the nuclide 3717Cl? You just subtract 37 minus 17, and the answer is 20. So B is the correct choice here. A nuclide has the symbol 2210 and E. What is the proton number of a nucleus of this nuclide? So protons are the number at the bottom, so just 10. Neutrons would be the difference between the two numbers, 22 minus 10. So 10 here is the correct choice, so we choose A. A nuclide of iodine is represented by I130, 153. How many neutrons are there? So to get the neutrons, you subtract the two numbers, 131 minus 53. So this would be 2, 11 minus 3 is 8, 12 minus 5 is 7, so 78. B is the correct choice here. And the nuclide notation for radium is 22688Ra. How many electrons orbit the nucleus of a neutral atom? So why did they say neutral? To tell you that the electrons equal the protons. And the protons here are 88, of course. So the answer is B. So B is the correct choice here. A nuclide of sodium can be represented by 2311 Na. Which row gives the numbers of particles in a neutral sodium atom? So of course the 11 represents the protons And of course, since it's neutral, so the electrons as well. So basically, it's just A. And the number of neutrons, by the way, is 23 minus 11, so it's 12. So this is also correct. But from these two, we already know that the correct choice is A. A nuclide of radon 222 is represented by 22286 Rn. How many protons and how many neutrons are in the nucleus of this nuclide? Of course, like we said, 86 is the number of protons, and the neutrons would be the difference between the two. So it's obviously not 222. So it's obviously this one. If you want to confirm, you just subtract 222 minus 86. This becomes 1, this becomes 12, 6, and then 1. 11 minus 8 is 3, and 136 is correct. But A, anyway, is the correct choice here. Okay, so next, the element sodium, symbol Na, has a proton number of 11, which is a possible symbol for a sodium nuclide. So if you have a proton number of 11, it has to be either A or D, because these are the ones that have a proton number of 11. But which is it? Is it A or D? Of course, it's not A, because the mass number here is 9. So the number of nucleons is 9. The mass number will always be bigger than the proton number. So we have a proton number here and we have a mass number here. This has to be bigger because this is protons plus neutrons. And this is just protons. So B has to be always bigger than A. So this doesn't make any sense, and we go with choice D, 1123. A neutral atom of argon and a neutral atom of potassium are compared. Which atom has more electrons and which atom has more protons? Now, since they're neutral, we expect the protons to equal the electrons. So the one that has more electrons must have more protons as well anyway. And just to compare them, we compare the bottom numbers. So we have 18 for argon, and we have 19 for potassium. So potassium has more protons and more electrons as well. So we're going to go with choice D. Each nucleus of nuclide X contains 10 protons and a total of 22 nucleons. Which notation is correct for this nuclide? This is very simple. You just have 10 at the bottom, 22 at the top. So the correct choice here would be, the correct choice here would be choice A, of course, 22 and 10. So A would be the correct choice here. The nuclide notation for the isotope lithium-7 is Li37. How many neutrons are there in an atom of lithium-7? So to get the number of neutrons, you simply subtract 7 minus 3, and the correct answer is 4. So B would be the correct choice here. So what is a carbon nucleus composed of? So we have 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. Anyway, let's just check the nuclide notation. We have here 6 protons, 6 electrons, and the number of neutrons equals 12 minus 6, which is basically 6 also. So what are inside the nucleus? Definitely not the electrons. So beware of choosing B, because B is wrong. It's only the protons and the neutrons. So D would be the correct choice here. If they said what is a carbon atom composed of, then we would have gone for B. But anyway, so D is the correct choice here. Finally, we move on to isotopes. So what are isotopes? Isotopes are basically the same element, X, but with the same proton number. So let's say this is 13, this will also be 13. And that tells us that they have the same number of protons. However, they have different number of neutrons. So the total mass number will be different. For example, this is 30, this would be 33. So here we have 20 neutrons. Here we have only 17 neutrons. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the chemical properties are the same because it's the same element. It has the same proton number. However, the physical properties are different because of the different number of neutrons. This is the basic concept of isotopes. Below are the symbols for 5 different nuclides. Which 2 nuclides are isotopes of the same element? So in order to be of the same element, they have to have the same proton number. So you have to go with 1 and 2. The proton number has to be the same in isotopes. So A is the correct choice here. Below are 4 statements about isotopes of a certain element. Which statement about isotopes must be correct? They have the same number of protons. This is what we just said. They must have the same number of protons. So D would be the correct choice here. A certain element has several isotopes. Which statement about these isotopes is correct? So they must have different numbers of electrons. They must have the same number of neutrons. They must have the same number of nucleons. They must have the same number of protons. So this is like the previous question, same number of protons and or electrons anyway. So different number of electrons would be wrong. Same number of neutrons, this is absolutely not correct because what differentiates isotopes is the number of neutrons. They have different numbers of neutrons and consequently different number of nucleons as well, because nucleons are the sum of protons and neutrons. So anyway, D is the correct choice in this case. Below are 4 statements about isotopes of a certain element. Which statement about the isotopes must be correct? They have the same number of protons again. So this question seems to be popular. D is the correct choice. An element has 2 isotopes. Which row compares the numbers of particles in the nuclei of the atoms of these isotopes? So the number of protons must be the same. So we're just going to get rid of C and D automatically. However, the number of neutrons must be different. And therefore, the sum of protons and neutrons must be different as well. Because if this is different, this must be different as well. Because nucleons are actually the sum of neutrons plus protons equals nucleons. So if this guy changes, then this must change as well. So A is the correct choice here. Below are 4 statements about different isotopes. Which statement must be true? They must have the same number of protons. They seem to love this question. Different isotopes of chlorine are represented as 3517Cl and 3717Cl. They behave the same way chemically. Why is this? Because they have the same number of protons. So D again is the correct answer. So same number of protons, different number of neutrons. This is the main concept of isotopes. We have a composition of 3 different nuclei. Which nuclei are isotopes of the same element? Of course, those that have the same number of protons will be the isotopes. So X and Y only. So B is the correct choice here. One isotope of lead is represented by the nuclide symbol 21482Pb. How many neutrons and how many protons does one nucleus of this isotope contain? So 82 is the number of protons, and the number of neutrons would be 214 minus 82. You don't have to really calculate it because it's definitely not 214, so it's going to be 132. And I remind you, if this were nucleons, we would have gone for D, not C. But neutrons are the difference between these 2 numbers, which is going to give you 132. So I just subtract 214 minus 82, and that gives us 132. So C is the correct choice here. And this brings us to the end of our video. I hope this was useful. Thank you for watching.